My sister's wedding prank led me to a dangerous stranger. The phone call started, as it always did with my sister Elaine, with a voice dripping in synthetic sweetness. It was a tone she reserved for when she was about to ask for a favor or, more likely, preparing to stick a knife in my back and call it an act of sisterly love. We'd been doing this dance my whole life. She, the popular, beautiful, slightly cruel older sister, and me, the quieter, more accommodating one who learned early on that keeping the peace was easier than fighting back. "Hey," she cooed, drawing the word out. I was just thinking about the wedding, and something popped into my head. "Do you remember Rodney from our street? The little boy who used to follow you around everywhere?" My stomach gave a little lurch. Of course, I remembered Rodney. He was a small, scrawny kid with thick glasses that were always smudged and a host of chronic allergies that left him with a perpetually stuffy nose. He'd been my shadow from 1st through 6th grade, a sweet, sensitive boy who cried easily and was a magnet for bullies. I'd been his unofficial protector, the one who'd let him hide behind me during dodgeball and share my lunch when the other kid stole his. Elaine, on the other hand, had been one of his primary tormentors. I have a vivid, ugly memory of a pool party at our house when we were kids. Elaine and her friends had cornered Rodney in the shallow end, holding his head under the water for just a second too long, laughing hysterically when he came up sputtering and crying. The memory made my hand tighten on my phone. "I just feel so terribly for him," Elaine continued, her voice practically oozing with fake compassion. "I heard he never really came out of his shell. He never gets invited to anything, and I feel like it's our duty, as people who grew up with him, to be inclusive." I almost choked. Her duty? Her only duty concerning Rodney had been to make his childhood a living hell. "Since you're still single," she added, a subtle dig that was as sharp as it was predictable. I was thinking, why don't you bring him as your date? It would be such a kind gesture. That way, at least you won't have to be alone at my wedding. There it was. The classic Elaine special, a seemingly kind suggestion wrapped around a core of pure malice. She wanted to parade crybaby Rodney at her perfect wedding, not out of kindness, but as a living, breathing testament to her own social superiority and my pathetic, single status. It was a power play designed to humiliate both me and him in one fell swoop. A part of me, the part that had been worn down by years of her games, wanted to just hang up. But another part, the part that still remembered that scared little boy by the pool, felt a pang of something. Rodney had always been a nice kid. He didn't deserve to be the punchline of my sister's joke. And maybe, just maybe, showing up with him, standing by his side, would be its own quiet act of defiance. "Sure, Elaine," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "That's a thoughtful idea. I'll see if I can find him." I could almost hear the triumphant smirk in her voice. "Oh, perfect. This will be so great." We exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then she said her goodbyes. But in her haste to get back to whatever she was doing, she didn't hang up the phone properly. And in that small, careless mistake, her entire plan was laid bare. I heard the muffled sound of her putting the phone down on a table, followed by the distinct sound of a laptop video call. Her voice, no longer sweet but sharp and giddy, cut through the line. "Oh my God. You guys are not going to believe this. My sister is actually bringing Rodney. Can you believe it?" A peal of laughter from another woman. "I told her to bring him, out of kindness for the poor guy, and she totally bought it. Wait until everyone sees her walking in with that crying loser. They will finally see just how desperate and pathetic her dating life is compared to mine. It's going to be hilarious." My eyes widened, and a cold, familiar anger washed over me. I'd walked right into her trap, just like I always did. My first instinct was to call her back and tell her exactly where she could shove her wedding invitation. But I knew how she'd spin it. I'd be the jealous, petty sister, trying to ruin her special day because I couldn't stand to see her happy. She would twist my anger into an admission of my own loneliness and desperation. No, backing out now would only give her more ammunition. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I had to find the real Rodney. I had to warn him. I could at least save one of us from the public humiliation she had so carefully orchestrated. It took me a few days of online sleuthing, digging through old-school alumni pages and sending a few awkward messages to people I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, but I finally found a social media profile that seemed to be him. I sent a message, explaining who I was and the strange request, and a few hours later, he agreed to a phone call. I braced myself, planning how I would gently explain my sister's cruel intentions. When I called, the man who answered sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me, his voice deeper and more confident than I remembered. I laid it all out for him. My sister's fake concern, the overheard phone call, the entire humiliating setup. I told him he absolutely did not have to come, that I just wanted to warn him, so he wasn't blindsided. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then he laughed. It wasn't a hurt laugh, but a warm, amused one. "I appreciate you looking out for me," he said. "But I won't let you go through this alone. Your sister sounds exactly like I remember her. Besides, he added, his tone lightening, I haven't been to a wedding in years. This could be fun. His easy acceptance threw me off, but it was also a relief. At least we would be facing the firing squad together. On the day of the wedding, my stomach was a tangled knot of anxiety. I had spent the morning practicing witty clapbacks in the mirror for the inevitable snide comments. I had an entire mental flowchart of how to handle Elaine's passive-aggressive remarks. I was prepared for a complete and utter disaster. Then the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, pasted on a brave smile, and opened the door, expecting to see the same scrawny, awkward kid with thick glasses and a nervous posture. Instead, my brain short-circuited. Standing on my doorstep was a man who looked like he had just stepped off a movie set. He was at least 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled out a tailored, dark gray suit. He had sharp, handsome features, a confident smile, and an easygoing charm that was almost blinding. I just stood there, staring, my mouth slightly agape. This couldn't be Rodney. Hi, I'm looking for Rodney, I stammered, feeling my cheeks flush as I nervously shifted my weight. The man's smile widened, a flash of perfect white teeth. Yep, that's me, he said, his voice the same one from the phone, but somehow even more resonant in person. Ready to go? My mind was reeling, trying to connect this Greek god to the perpetually sniffling boy from my childhood. It was impossible. No, I blurted out. This is not Rodney. I knew people had glow-ups after high school, but this was a complete metamorphosis. This wasn't a glow-up, it was a cosmic reincarnation. Shut up. You are not crybaby Rodney. He grinned, a playful light in his eyes. Well, I'm not a crybaby anymore, he said. But if it helps, the suit does make me look a little different. It wasn't just the suit. It was everything. The way he stood, the way he looked at me, the sheer confidence that radiated from him. This was not the boy who used to hide behind me. This was a man who looked like he could wrestle a bear and then charm it into giving him a ride home. The entire drive to the wedding venue, I was in a daze. When we walked into the hall, every single head turned in our direction. Conversations faltered. Jaws literally dropped. I saw my cousin, who was one of Elaine's bridesmaids, nearly drop her champagne flute. My sister was standing near the entrance, a fake, sweet greeting already forming on her lips as she saw me. But the smile died, frozen on her face, as her eyes landed on the man beside me. Rodney? She whispered, her eyes bulging out of her head as if she were seeing a ghost. He gave her that same, dazzling smile.
Hey, Elaine.
It's been years. You look beautiful. Thanks for inviting me to your wedding. His voice was smooth, polite, and utterly devastating to her carefully laid plans. No one could focus on the ceremony. I could feel the whispers rippling through the pews. All eyes were on the tall, handsome stranger sitting next to me near the aisle, completely and effortlessly stealing the show from the bride and groom. I snuck a glance at my sister. She was radiating a palpable aura of pure, unadulterated fury. She tried to recover her plan during the reception. I saw her huddle with her bridesmaids, and then, a few minutes later, she loudly recounted a story about how Rodney used to cry during PE class if the ball even came near him. But Rodney was ready. He simply turned to me, his expression softening, and said in a voice warm enough for the whole table to hear, "That's why I was lucky to have this one." She was the only person who understood I was having panic attacks, not just being a baby. She was like an angel. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. My sister had no choice but to force a tight smile and agree with the compliment, while her bridesmaids all cooed about how sweet and kind I was. Checkmate. She tried again during the wedding toasts. She got up and, in her speech, made a joking reference to how Rodney used to get stuffed in lockers by the bigger kids. Rodney just laughed, a deep, easy sound. "And now I barely fit in one," he said, gesturing to his muscular frame. Every woman at the surrounding tables practically swooned.
My own cheeks felt hot.
She was getting desperate. She pulled out what she thought was her final trump card. She brought up his weird anime drawings from middle school, saying she hoped he'd outgrown that nerdy phase. But before Rodney could even respond, her new husband's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Hey, I'm a huge anime nerd, too," he grinned, completely oblivious to the social execution his new wife was attempting. "What's your favorite series?" Elaine's face scrunched up in a mask of pure confusion and disgust. "What the? You never told me you watched cartoons." Rodney and I just sat on the side, trying to hide our giggles as we watched them break out into their very first fight as a married couple, right there in the middle of their own reception. Things only got worse for her. My own mother, who had always been a bit dazzled by Elaine's glamour, pulled her aside. I overheard her gushing. "Why didn't you tell me your sister was dating someone so successful? He's so handsome and charming." Elaine's face was a study in controlled rage. And during the first dance, as my sister and her new husband swayed awkwardly on the dance floor, nobody was watching them. All eyes were on Rodney, who had led me onto the floor for a slow dance, his hand resting confidently on the small of my back. Elaine finally snapped. She cornered me in the bathroom, her bridesmaids standing behind her like a line of designer-clad goons. "All right, spill," she demanded, her voice a low hiss. "Where did you find this actor? This is not the real Rodney." "I know it isn't." I tried to explain, to tell her that this really was the same kid she used to torment, but she refused to listen, her mind unable to accept a reality that so thoroughly demolished her plans. She just grabbed my arm and dragged me back out to the reception hall. She marched up to the DJ, snatched the microphone, and had him stop the music. A spotlight swung around and landed on me and Rodney, who were standing awkwardly by the cake table. "Everyone's been so curious about my little sister's handsome date," she said into the mic, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "So, why don't you two tell us your little love story?" She was trying to call my bluff, expecting me to stammer and admit that this was all a setup, a ruse to make her look bad. But before I could even form a sentence, Rodney stepped forward and gently took the microphone from her hand. He looked straight at me, his eyes warm and sincere, completely ignoring my sister and the 200 other people in the room. "She called me out of the blue," he began, his voice clear and confident. I was honestly shocked because I've been wanting to ask her out since we were kids. I just never had the courage back then. He paused, his gaze never leaving mine. But this wedding, this invitation from Elaine, it finally gave me the chance I'd been waiting for. I felt my heart begin to race as the entire room erupted in a collective, heartfelt awe. I couldn't do anything but stare at him, a slow, disbelieving laugh bubbling up inside me. Elaine stood there, her face a mask of utter defeat and fury. Her evil, petty plan had somehow turned her into the world's greatest and most unwilling matchmaker. But the real shock, the one that knocked the ground out from under my feet, came the next morning. I woke up in my own bed, a smile on my face, the scent of his cologne still lingering on my pillow. He was still asleep beside me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Elaine. It was a photo, a scanned image of Rodney's senior year yearbook picture. The person in the photo was completely different from the man who had been my date. Completely different face, different hair, different height. Underneath the photo was a simple, chilling text. "Interesting date choice. Wonder what happened to the actual Rodney." I turned to look at the man still sleeping peacefully in my bed. My blood went cold. "If you're not Rodney, who are you? And what happened to the real one?" He must have sensed me staring, because his eyes slowly opened. He looked at me, and a slow, evil smirk spread across his face. It was a look of pure, triumphant cruelty, and it was a look I had never seen before. My whole body went cold staring at that smirk. My phone kept buzzing on the nightstand, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from his face. The handsome, charming man from the wedding was gone, replaced by a stranger with a look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. This man in my bed wasn't Rodney. He never was. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled for my phone. I saw 3 new texts from Elaine, each one with the same yearbook photo attached, a picture of a round-faced, awkward-looking boy who looked nothing like the chiseled man currently sitting up in my sheets. I forced my voice to remain steady, a monumental effort when my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Who are you?" I asked, the words coming out as a strained whisper. "What's your real name?" He stretched, a lazy, cat-like movement, as if this were the most normal morning in the world. He gave me a calm, unnerving smile. "My name's Carson," he said. He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like we were discussing the weather. I just stared at him, my mind a maelstrom of confusion and rising panic, waiting for an explanation that made any sense. He leaned back against my headboard, looking completely at ease in my bed, in my apartment. "I knew Rodney when we were kids," he explained, his voice smooth and practiced. "Thought it would be poetic justice to show up as him at your sister's wedding after how she treated both of us back then." His explanation sounded rehearsed, a neat little story designed to be plausible. But something about it felt profoundly off. It didn't account for the calculated deception, the weeks of messaging, the sheer audacity of it all. A primal, instinctual alarm was screaming in my head, "Get him out.
Get him out now."
I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, a flimsy shield against the suddenly threatening atmosphere in my own bedroom, and stood up. "You need to leave," I said. My voice came out firmer than I expected, but my hands were still shaking violently. Carson didn't move with any sense of urgency. He took his time, swinging his legs out of bed, leisurely finding his clothes from the night before, which were strewn across my floor. The whole time, he kept talking, his voice a low, placating murmur, about how real our connection had felt, about how I was overreacting to something that didn't really matter. He pulled on his shirt slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. "We had fun, right?" he asked, looking at me with a bewildered expression, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Does it really matter what name I used? I wanted to scream, to throw something at him, to rage about the violation and the lies. But the fear was a cold, paralyzing weight in my chest. I just pointed a trembling finger at my front door. "Get out. Now." He finally seemed to get the message, but not before giving me one last, lingering look, a look that clearly communicated he thought I was being hysterical. The second the door clicked shut behind him, I lunged for it, engaging the deadbolt and the chain lock. I checked them twice. Then, my legs feeling like jelly, I stumbled to my couch and grabbed my phone. I called Maya, my best friend, because I desperately needed someone to tell me that I wasn't crazy, that the feeling of terror and violation that was choking me was real and justified. She picked up on the second ring, and I could barely get the words out before I started sobbing, a torrent of fear and confusion and anger. "Stay put," she said, her voice instantly shifting into crisis mode. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I sat on my couch, my arms wrapped around myself, staring at my front door until I heard her familiar knock. Maya came in bearing 2 large coffees and with her laptop already open. She sat next to me, put a comforting arm around my shoulders and said, "Okay, tell me everything. From the very beginning." We spent the next hour going through every single interaction I'd had with the man I thought was Rodney. We pulled up the Instagram account that had first messaged me. It had been created just 3 weeks before Elaine's wedding. The profile picture was just blurry enough that you couldn't make out his features clearly. It was a red flag I had completely missed. "You were trying to be kind," Maya said, squeezing my hand. "You were manipulated. That is not your fault." We put the wedding photos next to the yearbook picture Elaine had sent. The differences were glaringly obvious now that I was actually looking. The real Rodney had a rounder face, a completely different nose, and was significantly shorter. The man who had been in my bed this morning was a completely different person. How could I have been so blind? Then Maya asked the hard question. "Did anything happen last night that you didn't consent to?" I had to sit with that for a long, uncomfortable minute. I had consented to everything we did, but I had consented under a false premise, thinking he was someone he wasn't. The violation felt insidious and complex, a betrayal that twisted my own actions into something I didn't recognize. Maya nodded, a deep understanding in her eyes. "We need to find the real Rodney," she said, her voice firm. "We need to prove, without a doubt, that Carson isn't him." Maya opened her laptop and started searching, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I tried to recall specific, unique details about the childhood Rodney that only he would know. He had a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on his left arm. He was terrified of dogs after being chased by a neighbor's German Shepherd in 3rd grade. He collected Pokemon cards and kept his prized Charizard in a special, hard plastic sleeve inside a blue binder. Maya typed as I talked, using the details to refine her search. She finally found him on LinkedIn. A profile for a Rodney with our age, from our hometown, who now worked in IT for a tech company in Portland. His profile photo showed a man who looked exactly like the yearbook picture, just 15 years older. Round face, kind eyes, glasses. Nothing at all like Carson. My hand started shaking again as I stared at the photo. I had been so completely and utterly deceived. Maya took my laptop. "We need to secure everything. Right now." She walked me through changing every single one of my passwords, email, banking, social media. We changed the access code on my apartment door. Each small action felt like I was reclaiming a tiny piece of the safety that Carson had stolen from me. But as we worked, my mind kept replaying moments from the wedding. The way he knew exactly what to say to dismantle Elaine's attacks. The way his hand felt on my back when we danced. The look in his eyes during that speech. Every memory was now tainted, contaminated by the lie it was built upon. I picked up my phone to call Elaine. I knew it was probably a mistake, but I had to. She answered, and I explained everything in a rushed, frantic monologue. The silence on the other end was brief before her sharp, defensive voice cut in. "Okay, so you brought some random guy to my wedding because you can't be bothered to know what your own childhood friends look like, and now you're trying to make it my fault?" My jaw clenched. "You set me up, Elaine. Your cruel little plan created the perfect opportunity for this predator to step in."
She scoffed.
"I was just having a little fun. You're the one who slept with a complete stranger. Don't blame me, because you feel stupid." I hung up, my hands shaking with a rage that was finally starting to burn hotter than the fear. Carson had to have known about Elaine's plan. It was the only explanation for his perfect timing, his perfectly crafted performance. He had either been watching our family from a distance, or he had a connection to us that I didn't know about. This wasn't a random act. This was planned. He had researched us. He had used my sister's cruelty as his weapon and his cover. Maya looked up from her screen, her face grim. This is way more calculated than some guy just having fun, she said. This is someone with a grudge or an obsession who saw an opening and took it. The rest of the day was a blur of paranoia. I checked my door lock every 20 minutes. Every notification on my phone made me jump. Maya stayed with me, a constant, reassuring presence. We ordered food in. I spent the night in a state of hypervigilance, my mind spinning through a Rolodex of horrifying what-if scenarios. I finally gave up on sleep around 3 a.m. and started a new document on my laptop. I titled it Carson Timeline and began writing down everything, every text, every conversation, every red flag I had so willingly ignored. The next morning, I found the real Rodney's LinkedIn profile again and sent him a message. I kept it brief and factual, explaining that someone had impersonated him at a wedding and I was just trying to confirm he hadn't been in town. He replied a few days later. His message confirmed my worst fears. He hadn't been to our hometown in 5 years. He attached a current photo of himself. It was the man from the LinkedIn profile, the man from the yearbook. He was not Carson. Seeing that definitive proof felt like a punch to the gut. I messaged him back, explaining the full, insane situation. He responded within an hour, expressing his shock and sympathy. And then he dropped a bombshell. He said he vaguely remembered a kid named Carson from elementary school. A kid who was always on the fringes of their friend group, who got weirdly fixated on people trying to copy their mannerisms, their interests. He also remembered that Carson had been a target of Elaine's cruelty, just as he had been. He said Carson had tried to get revenge on her once by spreading rumors, but it had backfired spectacularly, making him even more of an outcast. And then Rodney said the words that made everything click into place. It sounds like he's been holding onto those grudges for a very long time. The wedding hadn't just been an opportunity for Carson. It had been his long-awaited stage for a twisted, multifaceted revenge plot. A plot to humiliate Elaine, to insert himself into a position of power and admiration, and to use me as his unwitting accomplice and, ultimately, his victim. A few days later, just as I was starting to feel like I was drowning in paranoia, I got a text from Carson. I saw his name on the screen, and my whole body went cold. Maya, who had come over with bagels and moral support, grabbed my phone before I could react. She read the message out loud. He was asking if I was okay, saying he was worried about me, that he really wanted to talk through what had happened. His tone was all warmth and concern, as if we'd had a minor disagreement, not as if he had systematically violated my trust and safety. I felt my skin crawl. Maya told me not to respond, that he was testing me, trying to see if his charm could still work, if he could smooth this over and pull me back in. That evening, armed with a folder full of printouts and a knot of dread in my stomach, Maya and I went to see a private investigator she had found online. His name was Tanner Barron, and his office was in a sterile, professional downtown building that made me feel slightly less like I was in a cheap thriller movie. He was a calm, no-nonsense man in his 40s who listened to my entire story without a hint of judgment. He took my folder of evidence, looked at the wedding photos, the screenshots, the yearbook picture. He told me he would start with open-source intelligence gathering, using the digital footprints to build a profile of the real Carson. He warned me not to engage with him at all. For the next week, Carson's texts continued, shifting in tone from feigned concern to wounded confusion, and then, finally, to a subtle, demanding anger. I saved every single one. On the third day, Tanner called. He had traced the phone number to a prepaid burner, but he had managed to pull metadata from the wedding photos I'd sent. They had been taken with a device registered to a Carson heirs. He had a name. The final report arrived in my inbox a week later. Opening it felt like detonating a bomb in my own life. Carson Ayers had a criminal record, including a misdemeanor fraud conviction. But it was the other document in the report that made me feel physically ill. A restraining order, filed 18 months ago by an ex-girlfriend in another county. I read her statement, and it was like reading a transcript of my own experience. The initial lies about his identity, the intense love bombing, the refusal to accept the breakup, the veiled threats. I wasn't the first. And if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be the last. That afternoon, I walked into a police station. I was terrified, but I was also filled with a cold, hard resolve. I sat across from a detective named Stuart Gregory and laid out the entire story, supported by Tanner's meticulously compiled report. He listened, his expression grim. He explained that because Carson hadn't explicitly threatened me or stolen money, criminal charges would be difficult. But he pulled out the paperwork for a restraining order. It wasn't jail time, but it was a start. It was a legal document that said, "Stay away from me." The night after the temporary order was served, Carson called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a masterpiece of manipulation, his voice choked with hurt and confusion. He sounded so convincing that for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. Then I remembered the other woman's statement, the fraud conviction, the cold smirk on his face in my bedroom. I saved the voicemail as evidence. The court hearing was 2 weeks later. I walked in with a binder of evidence that was 3 inches thick. Carson was there, representing himself. He tried to paint me as a scorned, unstable woman. But the evidence was undeniable. The judge granted a permanent restraining order. Walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. But it was the first time in weeks that I felt like I could actually breathe. The aftermath wasn't a clean, neat ending. It was messy and difficult. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma. She helped me unpack the lifetime of boundary-setting issues my relationship with Elaine had created, and how that had made me a perfect target for someone like Carson. I had to learn at 28 years old how to say no, how to trust my gut, how to prioritize my own safety over keeping the peace. It was the hardest work I've ever done. 6 months after the wedding, Detective Gregory called. Carson had violated his probation by contacting another one of his past victims. He was sentenced to 4 months in jail. It wasn't a long time, but it was something.
It was a consequence.
It was a record that would follow him. My relationship with Elaine is still fractured, perhaps permanently. I've kept my distance, enforcing the boundaries my therapist helped me build. My mom still tries to push for a reconciliation, but I've learned that my own peace is more important than a forced, fake family harmony. I'm still rebuilding. I still have nights where a small noise in the hallway will make my heart race. Trusting new people, especially in a romantic context, feels like a monumental task. But I'm also stronger. I'm no longer the person who will ignore red flags to avoid a confrontation. I'm the person who will walk into a police station, armed with evidence, and fight for her own safety. Carson, in his twisted attempt to get revenge and exert control, inadvertently gave me a gift. He forced me to find a voice I never knew I had. And that's a voice I will never, ever let anyone silence again.